Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a brand new event from the Fifth Chrome family. It is called the Mastermind Q&A. And I'm your host today. My name is Anirvan Sen. I'm the founder and CEO of Fifth Chrome. We are a business strategy advisory and a training company, and we specialize in the space of mergers and acquisitions, integration, business strategy, as well as we dabble in the digital space as well. We have been working with professionals across the globe. We have trained more than 300 professionals all the way from New Zealand to the US. And this is a brand new event that we are bringing to you where you'll ask your questions and we will give answers. And this is not just me, we will also have other experts join in. And for those of you who are joining me live through LinkedIn, you'll also have the ability to post your questions in the LinkedIn, which is going to be picked up by our team members and relayed to us. At the same time, if some of you want to join me on Zoom, you're more than welcome. This is going to be an interactive session. Obviously, this is the first one, so that's why we are taking a bit more time. And we will probably be experimenting in today's session, but subsequently, it is going to be um, a lot more cohesive with industry experts. But even though it being the first episode, we are quite pleased with the number of questions that we've received from practitioners across the globe already. So this means that this is an area that we are getting a lot of traction. This is also an area which has interest for many people. Many of you would be watching this as we go live. Now, this is also being broadcast on YouTube. So that's why if any of you want to essentially access the video recording, you will always have the chance to go back and go to our YouTube channel. It's called Fifth Chrome. It is pronounced, it is spelled as FIFTH and then CHROME, Fifth Chrome. And you should be able to see them on YouTube apart from LinkedIn. So with that, let's get started. And if you have questions, please drop them on the LinkedIn Live. Our first question comes from Sarah Andrews from the UK. Her question is, when should an integration be started? And this is an excellent question to get the conversation going, because literally what we find is in many cases, integration starts well beyond the acquisition date, the date of changeover of ownership, right? So this, unfortunately, is the case in many companies. But the big question is, when do you start? And that's where you need to go back, saying integration is essentially kind of at the end of food chain. And that's why what you need to see is, when do you need to decide upon what you need to do in integration? Now, if you look at the various stages, and this is where I think it would be a good idea for me to share my screen and bring up a particular um, stages of M&A to give you a fair idea of what this is all about. So let me first bring up my screen, and then we should be able to explain to you. So as you can see on my screen, now this is part of our training class that we conduct, a master class. So I've taken a page from there. So if you look at the entire M&A life cycle, you'll see to the left, we have something called deal pipeline review. This is where you start assessing the potential target companies that could potentially fit in your schema of things. It potentially could fit in what you're looking for from an M&A perspective. Now, keep in mind that before the deal pipeline, there is this whole decision around strategy. So business strategy is hatched prior to this stage. And once a decision gets made that organizations for a certain part of their growth would pursue M&A, that's where you get into this particular funnel. So so from the left hand side, you see the deal pipeline review. This is where to some degree you would assess the company from a strategic fit perspective, right? So this could be how how suitable is the company's product portfolio with what you've got to offer? How suitable, or what's the kind of overlap that you have with that company in terms of customers? Now, depending on whether you're going after consolidation of the industry, or whether you're going after access to a new market, the strategic lens definition is going to change. Now, this is obviously also where you would look at much more details about the possibility of getting further growth, the possibility of you would probably conduct market intelligence just to understand what goes on. But this is also where you would, for the first time, properly think about, if you would acquire that company, how you're going to integrate it, right? So that's going to be key, because literally, as you may have seen, a lot of industry report that suggest up to 80% of the integrations fail. On the other side, the 20% integrations that are successful are able to reap oversized benefits. So, which is why this is extremely important, that apart from your typical finance financial consolidation, financial due diligence, tax due diligence, and legal due diligence, you may also want to figure out a possibility of doing an integration due diligence or an integration design preparation, and the needs that you may have. So this is where you may need to get a couple of people from the operations team. Typically these could be HR people, technology people, or supply chain operations, who would come in and have their own yardsticks to assess a particular target, right? So this is the first time when thinking around integration starts, right? So right before the target selection, right before any legal binding offer has been made, right? So this is literally the first slate that gets created from an integration perspective, right? And then the subsequent ones, which is from target selection to deal approval and then deal signing, would go through more rigorous assessments, including due diligence. And this is again where, apart from the finance due diligence and the tax due diligence, the legal due diligence, try and make sure if you can see whether you will have the bandwidth, the capabilities, the expertise required to get that company integrated into your own, right? So whether it's business due diligence or integration strategy, this is where you'll try and assess the capabilities, the talent and skills. You'll also look at in-flight projects, right? Innovation, etc. So this is the second stage of active integration team member involvement. Once the deal gets signed, this is when you shift gears and you start using, you get into design, you start planning a lot more rigorously, you start designing, you also include more team members who can help you in this process, right? So this is up to the point of deal closing. Now, deal closing typically is the day around, some people refer to it as day one, but essentially it is the day when the change of ownership takes place. So, and this is when the active integration starts. So till such time, you primarily doing integration design and planning. You may have some interactions with the acquired company, so the acquiring company and the company that you're going to acquire. And then after the day one or the deal closing day, this is when you get into active integration. Now, depending on the size of the integration, it could be as little as 100 days, which is roughly about a quarter, 13 weeks. On the other side, some of the larger integrations or mergers, they can take up to 18 to 24 months. So you'll have to really decide, depending on the number of days, how long the integration is going to continue. And then once you've got access and once you've done your basic integrations, you put the measures to conduct the basic integration, the basic consolidation. That could be your typical consolidation of payroll, consolidation of email IDs, etc. This is when you start trying to figure out what other value can we extract, and that's what we refer to as post-merger optimization, right? So This is where you can get additional opportunities. And again, this could be anywhere between 180 days onwards that the post-merger optimization starts. Now, I must also say that this is where I've seen between strategic buyers and the private equities, I see private equities tend to do a lot better job identifying the post-merger optimization opportunities than, let's say, the strategic buyers. And again, because the private equities obviously are looking for an exit in a 3 to 5 years time, and therefore time is of essence for them, and which is why they need to come up with more opportunities by which optimization can be done, more avenues, more opportunities identified by which they can grow, and so on and so forth. Right now, this is again very important. Not all private equities are good at it, and not all strategic buyers are bad at it. Right, so it's a combination. But in general, the trend is private equities tend to potentially identify more opportunities for optimization in an integration, right? So this I hope gives you a fair idea of when an integration should be started, and when does it go on till. Right, so first stage of integration team getting involved is literally when an initial assessment of a target or a potential company that can be acquired is done, and then it goes all the way after the change of ownership has taken place, and then just before you may step into either business as usual or post-merger optimization is where an integration finishes. Hope that answers your question, Sarah. Next question is, why do M&As fail? Again, a great question. This comes from Adam Rubeski from the US. Absolutely brilliant question. And industry reports suggest quite a few factors. And I'm just going to name a few of them. So, for example, some of the studies that I've come across, they talk about economic conditions. Some of the studies also talk about the market conditions. How competitive is the market? Typically using the Porter's five forces, etc. That kind of thing. But they also talk about, in many cases, if they paid the right price for an acquisition. And then this is where I have difficulty in accepting that argument. Now, before I dive into that, let me also talk about some of the other factors, right? People also talk about cultural issues. They talk about integration, design problems, and so on and so forth. In general, if we leave aside the sort of geopolitical, economic factors, majority of the acquisitions or integrations fail is because while the acquisition was done okay because of the all the due diligence and everything being done correctly, uh, they failed during the integration. Right now, one of the ways that I explain to people is acquisition is the what and why. So, in other words, for example, if a company wants to grow, or if a company wants to consolidate, or a company wants to access new products, new markets, right? That's their if that's their strategic intent, then that's the what, right? And why would be that they were struggling to grow on their own and they want to complement their organic growth or something else. They find the new market very attractive, and therefore they definitely feel that they should pursue that. So that's the why, right? So the what and the why. And on the basis of that, an acquisition normally gets made. Now, I'm trying to make it simplistic for this session, um, but in general, the how is what defines an integration. How are you going to consolidate the companies together and extract that opportunity to create new value? That is where a lot of companies struggle. If you look at any of the due diligence reports or investment theses, there's a strong emphasis on the what and the why a company should be acquired, or what the company has to offer. That makes it attractive for an acquiring company. But how is it going to happen? How is it going to unfold as the company gets acquired and we get into integration? That's where um, a lot of the thinking is missing. And which is why what we find is a large number of integrations fail, or large number of M&As fail during an integration stage, right? And that is primarily because of two main reasons. One is integration design, uh, and uh, and the other one is integration failure is caused by leadership, people, culture, and organizational structure issues, right? So let's tackle the first one. Let's look at the first one, the integration design, right? So integration is a very complex maneuver which potentially involves, definitely involves all the departments of the acquired company, and it also involves a significant part of the acquiring company. And these teams need to come together, needs to collaborate, need to work together to make things happen. Okay. Without a common structure, without proper frameworks in place, this struggles. I mean, let me give you an example. I often use something called Hasper/Jameson model, which determines the it's a quadrant between interdependence and independence of companies, right? So when do you need to keep a company intact versus when do you completely fold it into the way you do things, right? So the interdependence versus independence. Sometimes you need both, right? So when you're buying a company, that while it needs to preserve some of its values, there is also an opportunity by consolidating, you'll be able to develop new products, you'll be able to strengthen your position in the market, etc. So Jameson Hasper/Slack's quadrant is one of the most powerful M&A integration frameworks. And yet, I would say 9 out of 10 integrations I come across, they have no idea about this particular framework, right? Similarly, a decision uh, to whether to buy or to make or to contract, get into JV. There's another powerful framework called Resources Pathway Framework. Even that, again, 9 out of 10 don't use. Uh, Another great example is when you talk about consolidation, business model canvas is a great tool that exemplifies how your business needs to be run or should be run, right? In case of an integration, again, a great tool, but very seldom used, right? So this is what we find in majority of the cases. It's almost like they have a checklist, an Excel spreadsheet, which mentions, oh, by the way, you need to consolidate the email IDs, you need to consolidate the payroll, you need to consolidate the financial reporting. Well, you know what? Those examples are good, but they will just do the tactical stuff. They're not going to create opportunities for you to be able to get you the kind of details, the kind of opportunities that would create real value for you, right? So this is again something that leads to insufficient planning, insufficient design, and thus uh, end up destroying an integration. Okay, so that's that part. The other part, of course, is culture, people, leadership, and organizational structure. Okay, a large number of integrations fail because companies were unable to align the leaders, to motivate the leadership teams and the individual workforces to rally behind the purpose of doing an integration. Not just that, typically, there's a tendency of the acquiring company employees to start taking an upper hand versus the acquired employees. And the acquired employees often feel unsure, they lose their confidence, they even are uncertain about their future, about their jobs. And that kind of leads to frustration, leads to anger, leads to bewilderment, shock, and that leads to dip in productivity. It leads to emotional challenges. In fact, the other day, two of my friends Rob Heaton and Toby Tester, they were talking about in their podcast. They were talking about this specific aspect, which is related to emotional quotient (EQ) versus the way operation stuff is done. In a large number of cases, the leaders, they get so antagonized, especially from the acquired company, that their productivity dip takes a their productivity takes a massive hit. They get emotional, and because of which there are delays in decision making, etc. So that's why this is another reason why M&A integrations fail. So overall, there are lots of different reasons, but mainly if you look at the integration and if you look at the internal organization elements, I would say integration design, insufficient integration design, and issues related to people, organization, leadership, and culture create that. I mean, who can forget the famous Daimler-Benz and Chrysler example, where everybody thought it was a merger made in heaven, and a few years down the line, from about 30 plus billion, the company eventually got sold. Chrysler got sold about 7 or 8 billion. I'd forget the exact numbers, but that's the kind of destruction of value that takes place if integrations are not planned properly. So that was a great question, Adam. I also have another question that has come from the from LinkedIn Live. Girija Shetty asks, in a promoter-driven sale, their focus or support on integration may not be that great. How do we deal with such situations where we need a strong change leadership from the sell side? Where we need a strong change leadership from the sell side. Good question. I think what I should say is, if I were to look at this whole question, I'll divide it into three parts, right? So one, I'm assuming, Girija, you're talking about the acquisitions in Asia. Now, typically, I find that the maturity level of integrations in different parts of the world differ. So I find that, for example, in the US, it's probably the most matured market. In Europe, also in Germany, in the UK, it's a lot more matured than probably some of the other countries, Eastern Europe. In Asia, the maturity is still in the pre-deal stage, which is the what and the why, but the actual discussions, the actual how, is still not as mature. Now, obviously, it's a lot more complex in order to sort of, how do you describe that? How do you describe a failure versus a success? Typically, Asian companies, when they would invest in another company, they take a calculated risk in terms of, I'm going to wait, watch, and learn. That's the attitude a lot of the Asian companies take. The problem with that is you leave a lot of money on the table. Not just that, I've been exposed to several acquisitions where the revenue takes a dramatic hit. Yeah, the companies have been bought by Asian companies, European companies have been bought by Asian companies, and then they got into that wait, watch, and learn. And somehow, either the acquired company started losing revenue in a short period of time, or they were never able to get to the level of revenue that they should have been able to get to at the first place, because these smaller companies, their revenue potential is usually more exponential compared to some of the larger companies, which is more incremental. And that's where I say there is real loss of value creation opportunity. So the question that you'd asked is, how do we deal with this situation? There is a genuine need of creating awareness of the possibilities through integration. One of the ways that you talk about is where you say, by the way, we understand all the tactical stuff that needs to be done, but what's the plan to create growth from this opportunity? Okay. And try and convince them to put it in black and white. what's the plan for growth? And when you talk about what's the plan for growth, you'll automatically start saying what's the product strategy going to be, or services strategy, what's going to be the go-to-market strategy, what's going to be the talent development strategy, which needs to be done in order to develop the um, to get that growth potential, right? What's going to be the technology strategy, right? So when you start asking those questions, uh, typically what we call as kind of an integration due diligence questions or integration planning questions, once you get to those kind of questions and start asking them, your promoters, that how do you foresee this is going to happen, that's where you will actually see some aha moment going there. Is it easy? Absolutely not. Because promoters often believe that they know it all, especially the Asian promoters. There is a lot of overconfidence that exists. And again, I'm generalizing, for the sake of today's session. But a lot of promoters, they're overconfident on the acquisitions. But in reality, when it comes to integration, their experience is very limited. And doesn't matter whether it's a small company, large company, or otherwise. Another example is Vodafone Idea, right? I mean, when the acquisition was taking place, I was in discussion with some people, and I had questioned them already at that point in time. A couple of years later, um, you know what happened. Now, I'm not saying that if I was there, I would have been able to sort of save it. But what I'm saying is there's certain fundamentals that are easy to identify, and this can be easily identified by well-seasoned practitioners. But for people who don't dabble in this space, they will struggle, and that's where you see millions of dollars being wasted, okay, or lost through failed integrations. And then I will also take the strong change leadership from the sell side. That's your last part of your question. Change leadership is is an area where, um, if integration was a challenge because of lack of awareness, education, ability, capability, change management is in an integration is a bigger challenge, is a much larger challenge in comparison. I mean, we recently conducted a change management research with industry practitioners. Majority of them mentioned that change management is considered fluff by their leadership team, or is intangible, and that is why it is difficult to manage and measure. And that's where they struggle. In comparison to, let's say, if we were to bring this into, let's say, different geographies, it becomes even a bigger challenge. I mean, the problem is not about what can you do. The problem is the leaders, the promoters have to recognize first that there is a problem, or there could be a problem. Without that, it doesn't matter how good change management plans you have in place, they won't work. And that's why, how do you convince your promoters? Change management has to be seen as an enabler rather than as something which is a cost. It's almost like an insurance policy in some ways, but at the same time, it's also an opportunity to create more value opportunity, to create more value potential, right? I'll give you an example. Um, by conducting workshops with people from both the acquiring company as well as the acquired company, have dedicated sessions, workshops, where the intent is for these people to identify as many ideas that they think could improve the way things can be done. This workshop, half a day workshop, a great example, but very seldom done. Okay, and this may cost maybe 5-10 grand, depending on if the people are spread out. But it's such a powerful workshop that when you get people from the two different companies sit together, brainstorm ideas on how to generate more opportunities, is you don't need hundreds of pages of change management sort of document how you're going to implement. You need a few of these high impact interventions, workshops, focus groups. You need to make sure that people on the ground uh, get their voices heard. Those are the kind of things that will drive the kind of traction which leads to change management, right? Or which is a part of the change management. And those are the things, instead of saying change management itself, if you start identifying specific opportunities by which you can get people to participate, get people to share ideas, get people to contribute, that's where the magic of change management automatically happens. So that was the third part, but great question, Girija. And do let me know if there are other questions, Evelina, from the audience. In fact, it's funny. The third question itself is, why is change management considered fluff? This is from Anand Shetty in the US. Um, well, interestingly, what we find is in the pre-deal stage, this is where you talk about the strategy, you talk about the deal pipeline. You could literally see on the screen, as I say, right up to this stage, this is all pre-deal. So starting from the deal pipeline all the way to integration planning. Okay. All of this, especially these ones, they are all trying to identify risks uh, involved with an opportunity. So here you start with a strategy, and then throughout this process, you try to unearth as many risks as there could be, and then try and figure out if it is in your company's interest to be able to, one, be able to mitigate those risks, and second, is it viable for the company financially? Okay. But that risk calculation, that those financial calculations, they're all very tangible, and this whole process is a very cut and dry. You have the deal origination, you have the deal review, you have the board which is going to approve a deal, etc. So all of this is quite structured, it's quite robust. And almost in all the steps, in order to go to the next stage, you need to have a very firm, very affirmative, very quantified, let's say, very quantified answers in order to proceed to the next stage. Okay. Now, and this could be risks, this could be financial numbers, this could be potential customers, number of customers, customer acquisition, etc. But very, very structured and very quantifiable, very tangible, if I may use that word. On the other side, when we talk about people related changes, behavior changes, habit changes, cultural changes, those are unpredictable, as in people's responses are unpredictable. People's responses, reactions are uncertain, right? So I think this was yesterday, I was talking to a practitioner where I was telling him that a person, let's say in small companies, it's quite usual for senior executives to fly business class, right? But we know that in larger companies, the benefit of, or the perk of flying business class is only given to really the executive levels, and sometimes real senior leaders, right? So chances are that this senior person from the acquired company, when that person moves to the acquiring company, that this person is considered not eligible for those benefits anymore, right? Now, is this something that's a big deal? It can be a big deal because these are the benefits that the person has been used to. The person has been used to not standing in the queues when they travel. The person has been used to being able to access lounges at the various airports. But what it means essentially is this person had a benefit that the company had given. Now, when this company gets acquired, the roles don't fundamentally change in this case, right? And yet, a certain benefit gets taken away. And the bigger question this person would have is, why does this benefit get taken away? And what do I get in return for the benefit, right? Now, imagine the smaller company, the same setup, but this time, instead of being a bigger company, this is one of the best companies in the world, the most admired companies in the world, and I don't want to name names, but let's say a real good Fortune 500 company. Okay, all of a sudden, this person who had business class benefits don't mind or doesn't mind to take on an economy class. Why? Because this person can see a massive opportunity for his career, his or her career to grow with the Fortune 500 company. This person realizes that now their job is a lot more secure because that it's going to be part of the Fortune 500 company. But more importantly, this person would also be able to share their status with their friends and colleagues and people outside and say, hey, I work for such and such Fortune 500 company. And all of a sudden, there's like wow factor. So when you see all of those, this person is likely to give away their habit of flying business class and very quickly switch over to the economy class. So same situation, except for one case, there's let's say mid-sized company, still larger than the acquired company, and on the other side, it's a Fortune 500 company, very well respected in the business world, and you see people react differently, right? So now, because of this, how do you quantify this, right? So in the first case, when the person is upset, his or her productivity goes down. Okay, it is also possible that the decision making that the person is involved in takes longer because that person may not be willing to make decisions quickly. So that could be another problem. And then the other thing is, because the person may be demoralized or demotivated, that energy or lack of energy is also contagious and could sort of this whole thing could be passed on to other people as well. So again, we find a very interesting dynamics, but the bottom line is it's not easy to quantify. Okay, and therefore in the pre-deal stage, when everything else is quantifiable, can be put in numbers, put it in Excel spreadsheets or PowerPoint, the people issue becomes difficult, and because of the nature that it's intangible, right? And that's where we see a lot of problems come in. Unfortunately, it is this part of the problem, if it's not addressed early enough, it can create havoc. It can create disasters in integration. So it's a double-edged sword. On one side, yeah, it's some people may consider it fluff, but on the other side, you know what? When there are more things uncertain, these are the areas that are higher risks, which should be addressed but don't get addressed. So that's the reason. The intangibility is the reason why some people consider that as fluff. I'm going to take a pause here and see if there are other questions that can be there from the LinkedIn Live, or by the way, if you guys are watching it not live but at a later date on YouTube or LinkedIn, don't forget to post these questions onto in the comment section. You could also follow our page on LinkedIn which is Fifth Chrome. Or if you want to ask us questions directly, then you could always send them to either me or Evelina, who's also part of our team, or at info@fifthchrome.com. So we would love to have these sessions, interesting questions with you. Okay, let's have a look. Next question is from Andrew Wang. How important is the people aspect in modern day M&A? I think that's a great question. In fact, I think it's probably a couple of months back, I'd written a blog, an article on this one. That blog is still part of the newsletter, Fifth Chrome newsletter. Sorry, my own newsletter, which we publish on Fifth Chrome as well. It's on our website. What we find is, if you look at the 20th century, majority of the M&A would take place between large companies, or at least one of them is large, the other one is smaller companies, but they were primarily based on assets. And again, this, back then there was a lot of emphasis on on manufacturing, on production, while there were still services companies, and services companies have existed forever. What we would find is there was a large um, asset-based thinking, if I may call it that. Over the last 30 years, there has been a tremendous development, evolution in the technology space. There has been um, global connectivity at scale. So many different companies have come up in over the last 30 years that are really disrupting industry after industry. What we find is the people equation, the talent equation has become stronger especially in services companies, technology companies, digital companies, and it is increasing. Back in the 20th century, most of the transactions would kind of fit into the asset-rich companies, but now we find a lot more emphasis on knowledge, on expertise, on IP of a company, and that's where I personally believe that this trajectory is going to keep going higher and higher about the people dependency. And which is why I also say that traditional change management approaches in M&A integration also struggle and are going to struggle even more in the future because they don't necessarily address the people requirements. They do handle people requirements, but they're not necessarily the best way to handle people requirements. I mean, just to give you an example, right? There's this concept called thrive versus survive, right? Majority of the M&A communication and change management in today's day and age would go after Kruger-Ross's change curve, which essentially means there is a dip a person goes through before the person comes up, right? That's the survive technique where you make an announcement, you tell people that there is your company is being acquired, and therefore these people automatically go through shock, bewilderment, anger, frustration before they reconcile themselves and then they come up the curve, right? But so this technique is essentially survivalist technique. In other words, it's flight, fright, or fight. Okay. On the other side, what we find is companies that have enjoyed super growth or higher growth than normal, they've been able to do it because they have been able to engage their talent to make it happen, right? These are the companies where they get ideas from the shop floor level or the, let's say, the development room level, the programming room level. They've been able to extract those ideas. They've been able to combine them. They've been able to excite the acquired company employees. They've been able to inspire them to be part of this great journey. And when they have been able to engage these people, it creates a thrive environment. So survive versus thrive. Interestingly, what we find is when people are in their thrive mode, their productivity is higher than normal. When they're in the thrive mode, they are also able to overcome demotivation, overcome the uncertainties that could be linked with integration, etc. And that is where we would definitely see a tectonic shift where more companies would then opt to go towards the thrive in parallel to the survive, or not just depend on survive alone. So that's where I think the modern day people aspect is going to be extremely important in M&A and integration. Okay. There is this question. Let's see. Aaron Wheating. Hey, Aaron. I see Anirvan related to people. Where in this chart are you putting operating model consideration? I popped in late, so you may have addressed it. Apologies if so. Yeah. No, Aaron, I think that's a great question. I had just briefly touched it. So I called it the leadership, people, culture, and organization structure. Kind of combining them is what you get the operating model or a capability of the company, right? Operating model is the magic glue that makes it happen, right? You can have the best, so while people are important, but the funny thing is, even with the best skilled employees, if you don't have the right structures in place, magic does not happen, right? So you may have the best leaders in place, you may have the best, let's say, team members in place, people in place. Um, you may even try to have inspirational culture, but without the operating model, it's not going to happen, right? So operating model is the magic glue that puts it all together. So I use different terminology. So I sometimes I call it capability, which creates a competitive advantage. So when you put together people, organizational structure, leadership, culture, governance, management systems, when you put them together and when they work in tandem, but not opposing each other, that's when you get a perfect that's when you get a perfect uh, rhythm, which constitutes the operating model, right? So when I talk about the operating model, is the operating rigor, it's the guidelines, policies and procedures, management systems, rewards and recognition, culture, everything put together would constitute the operating model. So these capabilities, the other term that I use for the same thing, they work in a configuration. You change something in a configuration, you will get different results. Operating model is exactly the same. You change the configuration, you bring about changes in that configuration, it'll start giving you different results. For the 21st century, third decade onwards, operating model or capabilities is what's going to drive competitive advantage. It's no longer going to be just heavy assets. It is going to be the people-based IP, the knowledge, the expertise, the talent, the skills that's going to drive that capability, which is essentially your operating model um, in ways. And what we'll also see in the changes that I foresee with the operating model going forward is talent is not going to be um, talent is not going to be the way we know or we knew talent in the past. Talent is going to be available as freelancers, as consultants, and not just necessarily internal employees. With so much of advances in, especially in the digital world, it is going to become extremely prohibitively expensive to maintain and manage all the skills in-house. Also because the fear of obsolescence is going to go higher. So we are going to see a lot more facilitative management that will take place, and that's going to be the core of the operating model. So I hope that answers your question, Aaron. Um, Operating model is the central glue that keeps all of this people, capabilities, leadership together. Okay, let's see if there are other questions. Okay, so let me see if there's anything from YouTube. Otherwise, I'm going to take one question from here. Okay, Jeff Rubin from Australia. He asks about what's a 100-day. A simple question, but what is this 100-day? Now, interestingly, this is something that I realized after I'd left General Electric, that this 100-day was something that some people attribute to the Jack Welch era. Okay. Now, I know that there were some people within, I knew some people during my GE days who would use 100 days. But what we had more popular was a 30, 60, 90-day plan, which is 30 days, 60 days, and 90 days plan. What I also realized that typically, in order to come up with a 30, 60, 90-day plan, the teams would try and get that plan in place in about 5, 7, 10 days or so, right? Combine those 90 days with those 10 days. I personally think that's what the 100 days is all about, right? Okay. But that's not the point. The 100 days is roughly about a quarter, 13 weeks. The first 100 days, the first quarter after an acquisition is done, after a changeover, change of ownership has taken place, a handover has been done. 100 days is important because this is the first time when the two companies are now owned by a single group of owners. This is the first time that they are able to openly exchange information without any regulatory problems. This is also the time when companies try to accelerate some of the cost opportunities, cost synergies. Typically, this is where reduction of headcount, this is where the possibility of consolidating real estate properties, this is where consolidation of certain vendors or certain customers, certain distributor dealer network, uh, rationalizing some third-party service providers, a lot of it can take place. Normally, in smaller integrations, this is the period of time where the rebadging takes place. Rebadging would include getting people new IDs, potentially new laptops with security. This could mean moving them into a consolidated payroll service provider. This also would mean consolidating the financial statements, rolling it up under one reporting structure. This could also mean, let's say, some technology system changes by which the exchange of information, the data exchange between different systems can be handled seamlessly. In other words, either you migrate data to a new system, or you use third-party consolidation softwares. Okay, so within these 100 days, it is also the time when companies want to reduce their costs. So they often unlock the cost synergies of headcount reduction. So any redundant roles, they try to rationalize during this period of time so that they don't have to carry the dead weight of those costs. Now, I said dead weight. It's essentially redundant, overlapping functions where two people doing the same job, once the consolidation has happened, does not make practical sense from business perspective. On the other side, I must also warn that slash and burn, cherry picking roles often destroy the capability configuration. The operating model that Aaron Wheating just talked about gets destroyed if you randomly take out people from the equation. So this is something that we always advise, that typically, if you do want to exercise some of your cost synergies, you first need to understand its implication on the capability of an organization before before you take that call, right? So, and one more point to articulate this particular aspect. People say HR, finance, IT, procurement, these are all support functions, right? Now, I can tell you, a recruitment person who dabbles with, or who is got experience in, let's say, recruiting high-tech employees, people who are experts in specialized technologies, it could be Python, it could be R, it could be some of the digital platforms, AI, IoT. On the other side, there are people who are experts in logistics. Okay, so recruitment, the person who's handling logistics recruitment has specialized skills, has that contextual understanding about that industry, whereas the person who's doing it for AI or for technology has certain other kind of skills. They're different. Okay, just because they're both the recruitment, just because they're both from the support function, they serve different purposes in the organization. They are instrumental in creating that capability and maintaining that capability. By slash and burn, you definitely end up destroying the capability configuration and impacting the operating model. So that's something that you need to keep in mind. Again, going back to the question about 100 days. So 100 days is the first quarter after the acquisition has been completed. In other words, the change of ownership has taken place and an integration has been initiated. Typically, it's the tactical stuff of consolidation that gets done. Some of the aspects that could be full-fledged ERP transition, cultural transformation may take longer period, but the first 100 days are the big one. In case of mid to large size integrations, this first 100 days often get used as a planning stage, especially the integrations that would last 12, 18, 24 months. this is where you plan. This is where more than planning, I would say this is where you finalize the plans. This is where your TSS that have been signed, you validate. This is where you validate the assumptions that you made in the due diligence. So those are the kind of things that you would end up doing in the first 100 days or the first quarter after an acquisition. So I hope that kind of answers your question. So I'm looking at the watch. We are coming to almost the end of our mastermind Q&A. But if you guys have any questions, um, then do put them on the live in LinkedIn, but also you could put comments in YouTube. And most importantly, if you found value, then make sure that you come back. We're trying to figure out a way by which you can get these notices on a regular basis. I mean, obviously, one of the ways is if you follow our Fifth Chrome LinkedIn page, you will be updated on these events. We plan to conduct this particular mastermind Q&A twice a month or every 2 weeks on Tuesday at the same time. We want to conduct these. We also hope to get more experts from the industry to come and join us for answering some of the questions. We also want to have some live debates, and that was what we found during our training classes, that it's a peer-to-peer conversation. That's the real attraction of these discussions. So these are the few ways. As I mentioned, if you missed any of this, these videos are going to be available on YouTube, on LinkedIn. We also plan to potentially transcribe and have a written version made available soon as well. Apart from that, if you have questions, you could also send it to us at info@fifthchrome.com, info@fifthchrome.com, which is FIFTHCHROME.com. And so with that, I would like to thank all the people. I still have tons of other questions that are there that people have asked. So hopefully the next time around, I'll be able to answer some of the other questions. But I actually have fun doing these. I actually love sharing knowledge and information, and this is what gives me energy. And I know, even though I'm kind of today on my own, normally this is a Zoom meeting where I have a few more people, but today I'm just on my own. But I know that there must be at least dozens of people there who will be watching this now or later. And yeah, sharing of information is what I thrive on, and love to have more questions asked, love to share our opinions, our views, our information, our answers. Also would like to get more research work going on, also like to get more practitioners get involved in the process, um, uh, both to ask questions, but as well as participate and give answers, because I can tell you something. I know a lot, but I don't have answers to everything. And this is where I definitely would be embarking, and would be depending on many of my fellow practitioners to give answers. But with that, I would strongly encourage to come back to us with more questions like this. We would be more than happy to engage with you. Uh, we even have a dialogue through Zoom directly, and yeah, with that, I wish you guys all a very happy rest of the week, and also stay healthy, stay safe, and make a difference in the universe. Thank you.